Hi, I'm making this video in reference to a discussion that was had in class last night that touched upon, firstly, starting with whether Truman or not was a unlikely president and leader, fell into it by happenstance and assumed the mantle and was heroic in his way. He carried on by faith, and that he was a humble, godly man. That's one question, because he he then went on to drop nuclear bombs on entire cities. And then I made the suggestion that it may even be possible that because he was willing to do such a thing, that and F.D.R. was not, that F.D.R. was taken out of the way. So I said I would do a little more brushing up on it because it's not something I know chapter and verse. And even the idea that F.D.R. was murdered, I don't really realize, I don't really recall studying that. That's why I said I was kind of out a bit in left field there with it, because I don't know. But I said it's entirely possible, which it is. And sure enough, I looked into it a little bit, and there is, I'm not the first to question that. And I want to provide some resources. I'm trying to make this very short, and all the links are going to be in the description. The one that I'm not able to put in the description at the moment, maybe I can address it later, but is a PDF of a book that I referenced called The Unseen Hand by historian and author Ralph Epperson. I would recommend not reading it on PDF and get the softcover book. It's not very expensive, and it's an excellent reference book. It's well researched, and anyway, I'll get to that in a minute. So let's talk about the murder of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, this is not any kind of a persuasive video. It's only one to just provide some resources, and I believe that it's necessary because to reconsider what we're taught about history, even our history. We know the victors are the ones who write history. It's the truth. It's a truism. Anyway, so I just found this. I've never been to this site before. It's called thecriminalelement.com. I don't know this author, but I skimmed this, and I will jump to the end and conclude. He makes reference to conspiracy theories and that he believes in Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation is generally going to be the true one. And he basically ends it inconclusively saying we don't know. Well, that's true. We don't know, and it would take some, all the witnesses are gone, and it would take an exhumation of the body to really find out. So, but I do want to point out there is evidence that might suggest that, and there are motivations and reasons. I believe, just from what I've even looked at this morning, there's probably enough to convict someone or some group in a court of law that he was murdered. At least that's what it would indicate. So, anyway, let me just I just wanted to reference this article. And by the way, as an aside, I will say, because we're talking conspiracies here, I am in no way a conspiracy theorist. In fact, I was very uncomfortable even suggesting FDR was murdered last night, but it was just a very informal discussion, and I was getting into a bit of theory because I don't know that I'd even heard that before, but I was suggesting it because the discussion centered around how Truman didn't know anything about the atomic bomb. And then the presidency sort of fell in his lap, and he had the kahunas to end the war using those methods, and he didn't know anything about the atomic bomb and these kinds of things that on the face of it I absolutely find preposterous. Preposterous. I got to look that word up for more detailed definition. I never use it, but I found it very difficult. As I said, it goes down my throat sideways to regard him as a humble Christian man when he could drop nuclear bombs on an entire people. And I already knew a little bit about that as to some of the motivations for that might be, and that the fact that Japan was about to surrender. And I want to point you towards some of the evidence for that, for your own edification and research, and to challenge what are the prevailing views, which we're being lied to all the time. We're being lied to day in, day out. It is now even law that, not just under freedom of speech, but it is law that the media can be used to propagandize the American people. And anyway, so moving on, let's try to wrap this up here as I get started. First of all presidents accumulate enemies. A man who succeeded in winning 4 elections can be assumed to have accumulated far more than most. Obama said to have averaged more than 10,000 death threats a year. So even now, we're looking at the fact that a president is a prime target to be murdered. They make enemies left and right, and I don't mean that as a pun. Or maybe I do, actually. Okay, so anyway, even the relatively benign Dwight Eisenhower is reported to receive more than 15,000 such threats annually. And Roosevelt's views in certain areas were likely to have created even more enemies for him. For instance, he, here it is, opposed the using the atomic bomb on Japan. Opposed establishing Israel. Now, this is a key thing. Had everything to do with World War II. Intended to dismantle the various British colonies scattered across the globe and help them become self-governing nations. So, within any wicked group of people who are striving for dominance, there are opposing forces. Even they're not all unified, even though they may be working conspiratorial in a larger sense. They may be working conspiratorially against each other. We know Satan's kingdom will not stand, and a house divided cannot stand. So do the math right there. So those positions alone would have painted a bullseye on him for several times over. Yes, F.D.R. had a share of enemies, but could he have been murdered? What do those who buy into this idea hang their hats on? Now, I will tell you, I don't buy into this idea. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy scientist. I want to look at the evidence. So I don't know if he was murdered or not. I think that the evidence strongly suggests that it's likely. But that's all I know. I can't say conclusively one way or the other. And the idea is that then therefore theory, yeah, but I'm not saying this is what happened. For example, I can tell you 9/11 was an inside job. Now, if the top of your head just blew off, I'm really sorry. That's well established, and that's not the focus of this video. But that's not a theory. That's the truth. And anyway, so he references a book I'd never heard of called The Strange Death of Franklin D. Roosevelt. So this book was written not that long after he had died. Now, I've done some more homework into the book. I provided a link to the Amazon, where you can buy it on Amazon. Apparently, according to reviews, there's only one chapter that's actually focuses on his death. But, if that has the information we need to know the truth. Now, I don't know about you, Christian, but I pray to be in the truth. I pray to know the truth. The Holy Spirit's the Spirit of truth, and He will guide us into all truth. And I want to know the truth about things, and that's why I'm not so quick to just accept the way things are whitewashed over us. For example, I contested. I said I need to fact check the fact that the poor girl, little girl at 9 years old, who was napalmed in her village, running down the street, skin fused to her, or clothes fused to her skin or burned off entirely, her skin hanging off, running naked down the road, became Time magazine cover, and who knows how many surgeries later. Anyway, we heard about her, but it was referenced that the South Vietnamese Air Force dropped those bombs. So I thought to myself, I'm not so sure about that. Well, I looked up, and Wikipedia does say that now Wikipedia itself is a suspect type of truth repository, so quote-unquote truth repository. Nevertheless, assuming that South Vietnamese Air Force did drop those bombs, let's never forget that at that time, do you think South Vietnamese Air Force was calling the shots? No. It was the United States war, or conflict or invasion. It was not South Vietnam's struggle against communism and we're helping them out. Vietnam in its entirety really wanted independence. They've been occupied forever. But anyway, this is not the subject of this video. My point is, I want to know the truth. And even saying something which is ostensibly true, that the South Vietnamese Air Force dropped those napalm bombs on that village. Really? Well, who was letting them were they just flying around carte blanche and making their own attacks? Or was it a coordinated effort? Or were they subject to the United States Air Force? And I would posit that they were. So to say that the South Vietnamese did it without referencing any which way that we had anything to do with that, I think is disingenuous. And anyway, moving on. So there was indications that he was poisoned. His body turned black, which indicated arsenic poison, even though there are other reasons that could happen. I'll let you read it, okay? So there's that. So this is The Strange Death of Franklin D. Roosevelt, the history of the Roosevelt Delano Dynasty, America's Royal Family. I've not read this book. I only heard about it this morning. But here it is. You can... it's very expensive, really. I don't know if you can find it somewhere else. Maybe you can find it PDF online and just read that chapter. I may try to do that myself. So here's another article. Huge secret about F.D.R.'s death. This was written in 2010. By the way, this one was written in 2013. Okay, this was 2010. Americans were told their president died of a sudden stroke. Not true, says a new book. Okay, now this does not necessarily go on to say he was murdered. It actually talks about he was hiding cancer. It could have been a different disease that was not even that. I'm not sure if this article talks about that or not. But anyway, Roosevelt's health was thus never an election issue, and his physician's explanation of his sudden death, caused, in their words, by a bolt out of the blue, a massive and unforeseeable stroke brought on by overwork, was accepted by Americans. Most things are accepted by Americans. You put it on television, you put it in the newspaper, it's gospel. I think there are there's a growing number of people, because of just sheer access to information and some vestiges of critical thinking, are finding that this, not so, Joe. We need to be careful. So, let's see here. He'd been fighting heart disease. Some maintain that he died from melanoma, skin cancer that metastasized from his forehead to his brain. So what's the point here? Point is there are other, we're told one thing, but maybe the truth is something different. This was even part of my just cursory research into the assertion that it's possible that because I knew a little something about Truman. Let me get to that right here. One moment. Where'd it go? There you go. For me, that's practically all I need to know about Harry S. Truman. You know what this is? The illustrious brother, Harry S. Truman, 33rd degree Freemason. He was the 33rd president, and he was a 33rd degree Freemason. Now, at the risk of offending anyone who watches this video who may be a Freemason, you may belong to a lodge. I know there are people, maybe not in that group last night, but I do know there are people that are affiliated with where we were that are. Now, does this mean they're Luciferians and Freemasons at the highest degree? Absolutely not. That's something I'll touch on in a minute. So, let's see here. Strange Death. All right. Strange Death of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Here it is. Well, this is a website where you can get books online to your heart's content. Practically, it's called Scribd. It's you can get it annually, and you can get a lot of books. It's like an online library, but you probably have it in your local library. So anyway, here is Encyclopedia Masonic. Harry S. Truman, the Freemason. Now, I contend that someone who wants to identify as a Baptist and a humble Christian of great faith, prayerful, looking for guidance from the Holy Spirit, yet he's a 33rd degree Freemason, this is oil and water. What fellowship has light with darkness? Okay, who was Harry Truman a Freemason? He was the 33rd president. Like his immediate predecessor, Roosevelt, Truman was a Freemason. Truman served as Grand Master of a Grand Lodge of Missouri and was a 33rd degree Freemason. You know, I've always found it, these grand wizards and all these kinds of things, when the rabbi, or not rabbi, excuse me, the Pharisee was effectually rejecting and for making prayers in the street to be seen by men, and his prayers were not accepted. What is with these men giving themselves these great and grand titles? Think about it for a minute. You know? So, let's see here. Okay, hang on a minute. Freemason parts, all right. Roosevelt died after long-standing medical issues and failing health. We should add, so they say. Truman was left with the tremendous responsibility of concluding World War II. Let's see here. Decision to use nuclear weapons. The Imperial Japanese forces at this point still refused surrender and fought on. Is that true? Okay, that was a point of contention last night. During this time, the U.S. under the Manhattan Project had been secretly developing the world's first nuclear bomb. Truman only found out about the nuclear project after being sworn in. Now, I find that difficult to believe. I don't, not as a 33rd degree Freemason, not as someone that was standing in the wings if something was to happen, which did, to the president, to become president. You know, that does not compute to me. After deliberation and consulting with Allied leaders, Truman concluded that using the nuclear weapons would be the lesser of two evils, and as it would end the brutal war sooner, saving lives on both sides. When has choosing the lesser of two evils really worked out? Now, Truman would take the ominous and controversial executive decision to drop 2 nuclear bombs in Japan, the first and only time in history. On August 6, 1945, the first nuclear bomb struck the city of Hiroshima, and 3 days later, another struck Nagasaki. Now, think about this. 3 days later, 3 days after Jesus was put in the tomb, he rose. You know, I'm not saying that has anything to do with it. It just occurred to me, stream of consciousness like. But my point being is that 3 days later, now is 3 days enough to really get the word out in those times, to get the pictures, to get the, you know, you could have dropped 1 nuclear bomb, Harry S. Truman, and broadcast far and wide the destruction. 3 days later, that alone right there stinks to high heaven. 3 days later, they dropped another one. One wasn't enough? Well, maybe it just wasn't marketed properly. If you want to show what we can do, you drop that bomb, then you get the video reels to the Japanese one way or the other, and to the rest of the world, and all the people that could put pressure on Japan to surrender unconditionally. Then maybe sometime later, I mean, again, this is just playing the devil's advocate. If you're going to drop nuclear bombs 3 days apart, think of all the destruction that happened around Hiroshima, or Hiroshima, however you want to say it, and how long it would take to get the news out from that area, all the communication lines, everything being destroyed in quite a broad area there, and people entering it and getting out of there to bring the news and pictures and videos to people all through that country. In 3 days? Seems like a foregone conclusion. We're going to drop 2 in a row. Now that seems pretty wicked to me. Here we go. Here's another picture of him with his little Mason apron. It's a handy coincidence he's the 33rd president, the 33rd degree of Freemason being the highest Masonic degree, numerically speaking. Now, at 32 and 33 degrees, from what I understand, a Mason of that level knows what Masonry is all about. Okay, well, what is Masonry all about? Okay, so we'll move on from there. Here's more about, this is Midnight Freemasons. This is nothing even, I think, critical of Freemasonry. It's just about telling the story and probably in glowing terms. I haven't read it. But he was a 33rd degree Freemason. While President of the United States, Brother Truman once said, "The greatest honor that has ever come to me, that can ever come to me in my life, is to be the Grand Master of Masons in Missouri." A humble Christian man a faith-filled, spirit-filled, praying presidential leader saving the world by dropping nuclear bombs and ending World War II to save countless lives on both sides. I call BS. His own mouth. The greatest honor that could come to me in my life is to be the Grand Master of Masons in Missouri. Well, what is Masonry? Lucifer is the god of Freemasonry. Now, if your brain just exploded, and maybe you even are a Mason, look, there's people that go to your church who don't really even know what the Bible is all about or what things it says. And people that are Christians, they don't read the book. A lot of Masons don't read Morals and Dogma. They don't really know much about Manly P. Hall or Albert Pike or Freemasonry going back thousands of years and where it all fits in the scheme of things. The Apostle Paul tells us that Satan masquerades as an angel of light, 2 Corinthians 11:14. One example of this masquerading is the culture of secret societies that claim to have illumination or light but are in fact full of darkness. Their Gnostic teaching inverts the truth, making Satan the God and God the enemy. They flip it. They flip things black and white. Black and white are Freemason colors. They make good evil and evil good. The following sources attest to the fact that Freemasonry is Luciferian. Now, this is just, again, an overview. You can do your own research. Okay? It's not up to me to prove it to you, but these things are from some of their own writers of their own literature. It's just like Islam. You want to know what Islam's about? What's their books say? It doesn't matter what the apologists say on talk shows, being pundits and everything. It's what does their book teach them? It's in the book. Occultist and author Manly P. Hall says, when Mason learns that the key to the warrior on the block is the proper application of the dynamo of living power, he has learned the mystery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands, and before he may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly apply energy. Oh, what great... well, let me put it this way. This is something that... where'd it go? Harry Truman said... I may have lost it. Yeah, I lost it. He said basically the dropping of the nuclear bombs in Japan is like the greatest event in history or something like that. Great for who? Okay, just a minute. Great for him because maybe he was proving his ability to properly apply energy. I hereby promise the great spirit Lucifer, prince of demons, that each year I will bring unto him a human soul to do as may please him. And in return, Lucifer, let's just say Lucifer, because I'm not even familiar with this term, but Lucifer promises to bestow upon me the treasures of the earth and fulfill my every desire for the length of my natural life. If I fail to bring him each year the offering specified above, then my own soul shall be forfeit to him. Signed, invocant signs pact with his own blood. Now this is referenced here. Okay. That's from the fellow, this is from the Secret Teaching of All Ages, Manly P. Hall. So, think about how many Masons benefited from bringing souls to Lucifer as a sacrifice through the dropping of nuclear bomb. Now, I recognize for some of you that may be watching this video that this is like crazy talk. Not so, Joe. Just stick with me here. LFS Levi, what is more absurd and more impious than to attribute the name of Lucifer to the devil? That is, to personified evil. The intellectual Lucifer is a spirit of intelligence and love. It is the paraclete. We know, an aside here, we know that in the New Testament that the Holy Spirit's referred to in Greek as the paraclete, right? An advocate. But here they're claiming Lucifer is a spirit of intelligence and it's the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit, in their view, now is Lucifer. Like I said, things are flipped. That's an occult satanic practice to make things reverse. Where the physical Lucifer is the great angel of universal magnetism. Now, Albert Pike. Now, there's a statue of him in Washington, D.C. Greatly honored. He's the 33rd degree Freemason and author of Morals and Dogma, which is effectually the Bible of Masonry. Lucifer, the light bearer. Strange and mysterious name given to the spirit of darkness, the Lucifer, the son of morning. Is it he who bears the light and with its splendors intolerable blinds feeble, sensual, or selfish souls? Doubt it not. The devil is a personification of atheism or idolatry. For the initiates, this is not a person but a force created for good, but which may serve for evil. Created for good? Okay. It is the instrument of liberty and free will. Liberty or free will. Right. What's the satanic doctrine? Do as thou wilt. That shall be the whole of the law. They represent this force, which presides over the physical generation under the mythological and horned form of the god Pan. Thence came the he-goat of Sabbat, brother of the ancient serpent, and light-bearer of phosphor, of which the poets have made the false Lucifer of the legend. What does that mean? They've made Lucifer to be out to be the devil, he's saying. This is an apology and a defense of Lucifer. The true name of Satan, the Kabbalists say, is Yahweh, God, reversed. For Satan is not a black god, but a negation of God. The Kabbalah imagine him to be a most occult light. Now, what's the Kabbalah? I'll leave that for you to look up. This is where things get into. There's quite a blending going back to the Babylonian religions. Okay? That which we must say to a crowd is, we worship a God, but it is a God that one adores without superstition. To you, sovereign grand inspectors general, we say this, that you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. Not the ones below, not the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, which are most of your Masons. I guess I was saying 32nd and 33rd. Maybe it's down to the 30th. I'm not a Mason, and I never will be, okay? The Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the purity of Luciferian doctrine. Remember, your boy, if you think he's a great man, here he is, 33rd degree Mason. Now, how do you get initiated all the way up to this without having anything to do with this? You know, a man will, most men, what's it say, even Satan knows, he said in Job about what a man will do to save his own skin. Well, what would a man do to gain the whole world? In their mind, what they think they want. Okay, if Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, whose deeds prove his cruelty, you see the flip here? Adonai in your Bible is made out to be a God of cruelty, perfidy, and hatred of man. Yeah, threw us out of the garden. Oh, God must be evil. Consequences for sin? God hates man. Barbarism and repulsion for science. Would Adonai and his priests calumniate him? Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately, Adonai is also God. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black, for the absolute can only exist as two gods, darkness being necessary to the statue and the brake to the locomotive. Thus, the doctrine of Satanism is a heresy, and the true and pure philosophical religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. Okay, so basically what you're hearing is what we see in many occult and pagan systems. For example, yin and yang. There's light and darkness and light, and it's a balance. My friends, that's not the truth. Lucifer is not good, right? Well, you can choose to believe it if you want. I choose to believe that Satan was cast out of heaven for rebellion against the Most High God, the God of righteousness, love, light, and truth. Arthur Edward Waite, 33rd degree Freemason, writes, First conjuration addressed to Emperor Lucifer. Emperor Lucifer, master and prince of rebellious spirits. That's all you need to know. I adjure thee to leave thine abode in whatsoever quarter of the world it may be situated, and come hither to communicate with me. You know, Bibles say we aren't to talk with the dead. We aren't to summon demons or dead people. I command and adjure thee, Emperor Lucifer, as a representative of the mighty living God, and by the power of Emmanuel, his only son. It's all twisted. So that link's in the description. Now, Move on here. Christian attitudes toward Freemasonry. Well, the Catholic Church, to me, this is another story. This says ban on Freemasonry. However, there's major issues with Roman Catholicism. This isn't the subject of this. Let's just talk Protestantism for now. Opposing stance, neutral stance, or no position. Approving stance, acknowledgement. So you got the gamut, right? Let's look at the opposing stance. There is a range of intensity among those Protestant denominations which discourage their congregants from joining Masonic lodges. Most of these denominations tend to be evangelical Protestant or other neo-Protestants. Then it lists some that are opposed to it. Let's see if, let's see here. I'm looking for one. Free Methodist Church is one. I guess that's not the same as United Methodist Church. Most of these condemnations resulted from the work of church committees appointed only in recent decades. Many of these Protestant condemnations have never been enforced. Well, yeah, there's no background. They don't preach it from the pulpit necessarily, and I would say that's probably even less and less than ever. You know, oh, it's just a good works club. It's just a boys club where we do good things. We raise funds and we do good things. Well, it's a lot more than that. And here you go. Harry S. Truman dropped the nuclear bomb. One of them. Now, I want to, where is it? Okay, I want to move on to, here's another, cuttingedge.org, Cutting Edge Ministries. I don't know anything or much about them at all other than this website. And the title of this article is Masonry Proven Conclusively Worship of Lucifer, Satan, Part 1 of 2. I haven't read it. You can read it. I don't need to read it. This is, by the way, this is a layout of Washington, D.C. There's the owl. There's the set and compass. There's this pentagram. You know, things aren't what they seem. So let's move on to, I mentioned that I was a student of author and historian Ralph Epperson. So the book is called The Unseen Hand. And I'm going to just back up to the beginning of it. This is what the cover looks like, okay? You can get this book. Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. Yesterday I told you that I favor the conspiratorial view of history over the accidental view, and I'll read this very briefly. It is a contention of the author that major events of the past, the wars, the depressions, and the revolutions have been planned years in advance by an international conspiracy. This view is called the conspiratorial view of history. It is now, conspiracy is not a bad word. It's been going on forever. Well, you know, since the dawn of man. And to deny it or think that it's crazy, or that people who will look at evidence for conspiracies that there's something wrong with their thinking, there's something wrong with their mind, is mind control. In fact, conspiracy theorist was a pejorative word apparently put forth by one of the alphabet agencies years and years ago. It is definitely, I think, around the JFK situation. The conspiratorial view of history is definitely not the view held by the majority of historians today. The more traditional view is called the accidental view of history, and it holds that no one really knows why events happen, they just do. It is the hope of the author that those who read this book will discover that the conspiratorial view of history is one of the best supported by the evidence. Evidence. Okay? Look at the table of contents. This is a great overview. This is a great work. Here are the chapter titles. Forms of government, economic terms, money and gold, secret societies, communism, the Russian Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, the American Revolution, the Rothschild family, Monroe Doctrine, Civil War, Federal Reserve, graduated income taxes, nonviolent organizations, population control, Trilateral Commission, World War I, World War II, the atomic bomb, Korean War, so on and so forth. World government, humanism. You know, this book was written in the late 70s, and this is Ralph is a Christian man. To my God who gave me my freedom. You know, he's I know him. I know the man. He's a good man, and he centers a lot about Freemasonry in his research. I I've incorporated my own understanding of history and worldview, many other forces at work, all working together, of course, for they have the same spirit. But this is about the author. Anyway, moving on, I want to get down to World War II. So let's talk about Roosevelt. Now, he doesn't really talk about Roosevelt being being murdered or assassinated. That's something that I looked into after. Just logic tells me that maybe he died very conveniently because he wouldn't do it, and didn't take much research to find out. Yeah, he opposed a nuclear bomb. Maybe he didn't have the stomach for it. Just simple as that. I don't know. But it doesn't mean that does not make him a good man. If we look here now, this is, by the way, I better skip down. This is extremely, every chapter. Let me just show you. Every chapter is documented where all these facts and stories and things come from. Okay, so let's see, World War II. There's the Korean War. World War II, chapter 24. Here are all the references. Okay, if you even want to dispute them with Mr. Epperson, I'll give you his number. You're welcome to do so. He takes time out to try to reach people with the truth. He's very grieved. The American people seem to have no heart for it. At any rate, let's move on. Let's move back here. I just want to share a couple things. You can read the book yourself. But let's see here. A couple things I want to just point out. Forgive me, it's difficult to kind of keep my place here. There's a lot about the lead up to World War II that I'm not going to get into. It's important as well. It's all very convoluted, very, there's way more deep dives that could be done on even many of the things that are referenced in here. Ain't nobody got time for that anymore. As it was said last night, how you can't even keep up with all the strange things that are happening all the time. Let's see here. Almost there. In a book entitled Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt and the Coming of the War, published by D.C. Heath and Company, Professor Tanzel makes this interesting observation. The policy of pressure upon Japan predated President Roosevelt's Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, some 2 decades. Now, the Secretary of War, as you likely know, is now called the Secretary of Defense. Under Woodrow Wilson, a 3-pronged offensive was launched against Japan. Anyway, what this is getting at is that the whole fact that most people believe that we were attacked out of the blue on Pearl Harbor, Japan, this island, just attacked us in Hawaii, and boom, now it was an act of war and we're in war. Well, it goes way back further than that, and the evidence is here that the United States wanted to be in a war, but you have to sell a war to the American people, and we've seen it again and again. Selling the war in Iraq, or the invasion of Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. They've got them. Well, they didn't. It was a lie, but you had to get people behind it. And I would get into 9/11 on that, but I won't go into that now. Let's see. The American government knew that they were vulnerable at Pearl Harbor, the site of Japan's quote-unquote surprise attack to start World War II. It was at Pearl Harbor in 1932 that the U.S. Navy conducted maneuvers to test the chances of a success of an attack from the sea. That's a long time prior, right? They discovered that Pearl Harbor was vulnerable from as close as 60 miles off the shore. That meant Japan could attack from 60 miles away from Pearl Harbor and be undetected. The American Navy proved it. Here's your reference, okay? Not only was the government concerning itself with a possible war with Japan, but it was also aware that American capitalists were creating a war machinery in Germany in the early 1930s, before Germany started their involvement in World War II. William Dodd, U.S. ambassador in Germany, wrote Roosevelt from Berlin. So Roosevelt was abreast of this stuff. So you can read all this, okay, having to do with oil companies and chemical companies, and it even has to do with the establishment of the nation state of Israel, which happened under Truman, 48. So moving forward, let's see here. Want to get back to the Pearl Harbor thing because that was the subject of Pearl Harbor and then the bomb in the end. This goes into a lot about Germany. One moment, gonna get there. Okay. Both war zones presented plenty of opportunities to involve the American government in the war, but Roosevelt was quick to seize upon opportunities presented. His first opportunity came from the war in the Pacific. It was in August 1940 that the United States broke the Japanese wartime code. This gave the American government the ability to read and understand all of their recoverable wartime messages. Machines were manufactured to decode Japan's messages. They were sent all over the world, but none was sent to Pearl Harbor. Remember, they already knew back for 32 that Pearl Harbor was a vulnerability that it could easily be basically surprise attacked. Let's see here. But the key to America's early involvement occurred in 1940 when Japan, Germany, and Italy signed the tripartite treaty. This treaty required that any of the three nations had to respond by declaring war should any one of the others be attacked by any of the allied nations. This meant that should Japan attack the United States, and the United States responded by declaring war against Japan, it would automatically be at war with the other two nations, Germany and Italy, which happened. Okay. Roosevelt now knew that the war with Japan meant war with Germany. His problem was solved. Now, you would need to read prior to this to understand why that was a solution that was desired. He made secret commitments to Churchill and the English government to become involved in the war against Germany, and he knew that the only way he could fill his secret commitments to Churchill to get us into this war without openly dishonoring his pledges to the American people to keep us out was by provoking Germany or Japan to attack. And that was referenced by someone last night as well, that that basically Japan was provoked to attack us. And well, then who really started it, right? So Roosevelt moved towards the Pacific theater first, knowing that if he could provoke Japan to attack America first, America would automatically be at war with Germany. So let's move on here. I want to get to I'll just wrap this up. You can read this yourself if you're interested. But it's funny, and this is, Americans were not interested in foreign wars. In fact, the war in Germany was really, from what I understand, it was something the American people did not want to be involved with. Not at first. It's important to remember that in 1940, candidate Roosevelt told the American people, "I say to you, fathers and mothers, I will say it again and again and again, your boys will not be sent into foreign wars." Well, typical hypocrite, liar in chief, okay? Same old story today, right? So Richardson was later appraised his situation at Pearl Harbor and felt that his position was that's Admiral Richardson, I believe. He visited Roosevelt twice in 1940, recommended the fleet be withdrawn to the west coast of America because his ships were inadequately manned for war. The Hawaiian area was too exposed for fleet trading, and the fleet defenses, both air and submarine attacks, were far below the required standards of strength. So this admiral was telling the president, we got a problem out here. We're vulnerable to attack. In the meantime, Roosevelt was working in ways to provoke Japan to attack us. So anyway, let's see here. Okay. You'll have to read this yourself. I want to get to the part where I suggested that Japan was about to surrender. Okay. Just a moment. Japan continued its efforts of staying out of a war with the U.S. and had its ambassador in Washington continue his efforts to securing a no-war treaty with the Secretary of State. On November 22nd, 41, they wired their ambassador, "Do your best, spare no efforts, and try to bring about the solution we desire." Even though Japan was attempting to avoid war with the United States, the Japanese were being encouraged by an unlikely source to strike out at the U.S. In 51, there was an article by Washington correspondent O'Donnell concerning various old Far Eastern intelligence reports, which were being closely guarded in Washington. Kept secret, in other words. Among those documents were the 32,000-word confession of Soviet spy Richard Sorge. Mr. Sorge was a Russian spy who'd infiltrated the German embassy in Japan and worked hard to convince Japanese officials that Japan should not attack Russia, but move south at the risk of war with the United States. When Sorge informed the Kremlin in Russia in October 41 that the Japanese intended to attack Pearl Harbor within 60 days, he received thanks for his report and the notice that Washington, which would mean Roosevelt, Marshall, Admiral Stark, and others, had been advised of the Japanese intentions in early as October. Okay, so on November 25th, the day that the Japanese fleet sailed for Present Harbor, Roosevelt convened a meeting of the cabinet members, naval operations and such like. According to Stimson's testimony, the president brought up the event that we were likely to be attacked as soon as next Monday, for the Japanese are notorious for making an attack without warning. In spite of the risk involved, this is a quote, in spite of the risk involved, however, in letting Japanese fire the first shot, we realized that in order to have the full support of the American people, it was desirable to make sure that the Japanese be the ones to do this, so that there should remain no doubt in anyone's mind as to who were the aggressors. It's wicked, man. The Japanese embassy in Washington sent the following message to Tokyo. I'm sorry to tell you that we cannot agree to Japanese treaty proposal. The Japanese have proposed a treaty. Blessed are the peacemakers. How about that? British intelligence service, which had men inside the Japanese diplomatic agencies in the U.S., took the November 26th telegram to Tokyo as meaning that the Japanese negotiations were off. Services expect action within 2 weeks. Roosevelt knew this. Let's see. A very important American intelligence officer in service in the Far East during 1941, here it is, had gained knowledge of the Yamamoto plan to send a task force to attack Pearl Harbor and sent 3 separate messages to Washington revealing the information. And at least 2 of these reached the Army files well before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Here's your documentation, okay? If you want to look this up and say, oh, that's not true, well, go look it up. Finally, in desperation, the Japanese government sent a message to their Washington embassy on December 6th, in essence breaking off all negotiations. After the message was intercepted by the American government, decoded and given to Roosevelt, he is quoted as saying, "This means war." You can almost see him licking his lips, in my mind. That's what they wanted. Roosevelt now knew that Japan planned on attacking the U.S., but still he did nothing about warning the American forces at Pearl Harbor. Do you know that means he let people die? Your mothers and fathers, your sons are in Pearl Harbor, they're going to die because I want a war for, various reasons. Or the powers that shouldn't be do. And on December 7th, Japan attacked. American forces were not prepared for the attack, and the attacking Japanese forces had orders from Japan to return to Japan should they detect any evidence that the Americans had been alerted. Well, they had been, but they laid low, right? Now, as their Air Force attacked Pearl Harbor, they reported that the American planes were having difficulty getting off the ground. Now, why was that? Because Roosevelt ordered the planes grouped in a fashion, meaning they all in a circle, grouped in circles, propellers facing inward, as a result of an order by Roosevelt. The planes grouped in this fashion because he feared acts of sabotage against the planes and was acting to protect them. But the airplanes didn't have a reverse gear, and the grouping of the planes in this manner made it extremely difficult to rapidly get out of the circles and get into the air. One critic of the circling these airplanes, Harry Elmer Barnes, has written, bunching the planes in a circle, wing to wing, would make them helpless in the event of a surprise air attack. There's your citation. How about that? Not only did they know the attack, didn't do anything, they basically also tied some hands behind backs. Another strange circumstance was the makeup of the fleet. Now, this was referenced last night as well, that the ships were obsolete. Well, here we go. The makeup of the fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor at the time of the attack consisted of 9 battleships and 3 aircraft carriers, along with a host of smaller ships. During the attack, the Japanese sank or seriously damaged 8 battleships, but no aircraft carriers. The American government had reasoned that the aircraft characters would have an extremely important role to play in the type of war they felt would be waged in the Pacific theater. So all of the aircraft carriers were moved out of Pearl Harbor, and all of the less valuable battleships were left behind. The battleships were expendable because most of them had been constructed prior to or during World War I, which meant that they were old and obsolete. Along with the aircraft carriers, Roosevelt's government also withdrew the smaller mobile ships that they knew could be more efficiently utilized in a sea war. You know, just do the math here. You think about it. This guy, Admiral Kimmel, commander of the naval forces at Pearl Harbor, places the blame for Pearl Harbor's unpreparedness on Roosevelt. This is the admiral out there. Who would know? He has written, quote, "We are unready at Pearl Harbor because Roosevelt's plans required that no word be sent to alert the fleet in Hawaii." There's your reference. You know, I could go on, okay? So, got us into war, okay? Now we have the bomb. Let's talk about Truman, okay? Moving on down. And then that's the end of the video, okay? It's a little longer than I expected. Atomic bomb. It was in 1945 that the war started to unwind. I put forward the assertion that it was the Japanese, it was all but over for them. The Japanese attempted to end the war on February 14th, 45, when the American government learned of their efforts to surrender through a decoded message between their government and the Russian government. There's your reference. One, okay, right here. But the American government was not ready to accept Japan's efforts to end the war. Marshall made it clear that he had little faith in the Japanese overtures for peace. Okay, well, they don't really mean it. These peace overtures were repeated again in June 45 when Russia received word that Japan was ready to end the war. These messages were once again intercepted by the American government, and nothing was done. How many, in all these months, how many men, women, and children on the islands, at sea, how many families were destroyed? How many lives were destroyed? It's just so wicked. Yeah, we're a Christian nation. Yeah, okay. Well, who's running this nation? Think about it. The reason for America's reluctance, well, find out about it. America's reluctance to end the war became clear on August 6, 45, when the U.S. dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. The American Air Force tried to warn the people of the city that it was certain to be destroyed, as they dropped 720,000 leaflets onto the city stating that it would be obliterated unless Japan surrendered at once. A good many people left the city, but it was estimated that around 250,000 remained. So I will point out that, by the way, this isn't a cult practice. Just like you see the villain in the movies right before, let's say, they throw James Bond to the sharks, they tell him about their megalomaniac plans to rule the world and how they're going to do it and how they lured him to their lair, you know, things like that. Okay, we see this again and again in Hollywood, and it's an occult practice that it's a karmic absolution of guilt and responsibility. If you tell someone we're going to do such and such this to you, but they remain to get nuked, and that's their fault. You didn't do anything wrong. I am just saying that fits that modus operandi. The decision to drop a second bomb was made. No top-level meeting had been convened to discuss the necessity of a second bomb. Yeah, no top-level meeting. It was sort of a foregone conclusion, is what it seems like to me. No top-level meeting had been convened to discuss the necessity of a second bomb. No attempt be made to determine if the first bomb, or Russian entry into the conflict, had quickened Japan's intent to surrender. How about that? I didn't even remember that. Truman, who would assume the presidency after Roosevelt's death on April 12th, is quoted as saying after the first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima that, quote, "This is the greatest thing in history." There's a quote. There's a citation. Look it up. Really? Well, one could argue the greatest thing meaning a significant event. Really? Is that what he felt? Or did he sort of enjoy that? Sound preposterous? Not when you know what it means to these people. There are those in high places in the American government who felt that it was not necessary to drop either bomb on Japan. Now think about that. High places in the American government, they felt it wasn't necessary to drop either bomb on Japan. One, an admiral, Admiral William Leahy, was on record as saying, "I was of the firm opinion that our war against Japan had progressed to the point where her defeat was only a matter of time and attrition." There's your quote. Okay. There is still speculation as to why the two cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, here it comes, brothers and sisters, were selected as the targets for the two atomic bombs, since neither were military targets in the main. One author offers an explanation. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the chief centers in Japan of a native Christian population. Here's your citation. There is some evidence that before the bombs were dropped on Japan, Roosevelt had some second thoughts about the use of these enormously powerful and destructive weapons on innocent people. The president prepared a speech for delivery on Jefferson Day. Roosevelt had intended to expose openly to the world, quote, the danger that politicians will accept as inevitable, the destruction of innocent people to achieve their goals, and that scientists will concentrate on the means and ignore the ends of their research. Yeah, they want to create this massive bomb, but they don't really, they're not focusing on what that really is going to mean to people, is what I take that to mean myself, in part. Roosevelt may have had twinges of a conscience. That's what that seems like to me. Or, could even be, this is a bit nefarious, but it could be that he didn't want to be the one, like we saw evidence, and I didn't necessarily read it all, that he wanted to be absolved of blame and things. Like he wanted the blame to be, for things to happen the way he wanted, he needed to have things constructed in a way that it couldn't come back to him. So there's that. In any event, before he could deliver the address, Roosevelt croaked. Okay, how about that? So the world will never know for certain just what is intended by this speech. Let's see here. That may be it. Let's see. There's some more very interesting ideas put forth here that I recommend looking into. But again, when we're listening to a guy talk to us about faith, and he's an esteemed man himself, and I had a problem in a different study with the same gentleman, where he would cite these stories, and I would research them, and I couldn't find them. It's like they were made up. They seem to be made up. There's no need for a pastor to make up stories when if they really are a pastor, there's resources, there's personal experience, there's all kinds of things that you can use as your subject matter. But I find it very curious, and it may be innocent enough on his part, but I find it very curious that it's part of the whitewashing. The rot runs deep. Deceivers are not always just knowing that they're deceiving, they're deceived themselves. So to put forth that, and I'm not suggesting that this particular man is a blatant deceiver, but he is, just kind of putting forth the idea that we're to look at this President Truman as a humble, godly man who made difficult decisions and took on the mantle of an office in a just untenable situation by just thrust into the position, and came out of it heroically, ended the war, and then whitewashed the fact of, not even give a nod to the fact of the Christians who were decimated and murdered and maimed for generations. To this day, there's fallout from the people that were affected by this act of horror. I just find it unconscionable. Let me tell you where I'm coming from. I'm a fan of all kinds of music, and there's a movie made about Woodstock. This is the 50th anniversary this year. Well, a lot of the musicians that participated and organizers and just people involved have passed away. And they, at the end of this movie that was, I think came out this year or late last year, at the end they roll the credits, and there's a lot of, there's sort of a memorial to all these different individuals who passed on, like Richie Havens and such like. And I was waiting for it, and I was disappointed, as I expected I would be. I wasn't disappointed that I was disappointed. How about that? I was disappointed that there was at least one person. There might have been another, but I just want to reference the one guy, because I was trying to think of him. There was one young man who tragically was not seen in the mud or something. He was run over by a tractor and killed in a sleeping bag. Woodstock was the end of the line for him. That was the apocalypse for him. The Lord came for him that day. And he was, let's say, the first to die at Woodstock, a Woodstock goer, and made no mention. Nobody knows his name. Could have easily just put a 2-second little thing of his name, who was accidentally killed. Nothing. You talk about can't see past the end of your nose. The movie makers, the celebrities, possibly, whoever was involved. If I was in that movie and I was a rock star person like that, I tell you this, I'd have a bit of an issue with the fact that that guy was not remembered as well. So what's my point? What about all those Christians? What about all those non-Christians even? Bombed them into eternity, right? Bombed them out of existence in this life. What's next for them? Resurrection and the judgment, right? They dropped all those leaflets. Could have dropped gospel tracts, you know what I mean? But no, that's not the point of dropping those leaflets, and it's not necessarily the point of saving their lives. Think about that. You can look into that yourself. The occult practice of telling you, and they do it all the time, foreshadowing. When I say they, I'm talking the powers that shouldn't be. It's a strange world. A lot of our art and media foreshadows things that are to come. Okay? And because we end up being victims of it and didn't catch the message, they're absolved of any material guilt. So anyway, there you go. Puzzle and evidence. There's more to things than meet the eye. And I, for one, don't like to sit and just drink stuff in and take it down and accept just because a famous pastor, like United States pastor and minister who's well esteemed and has a very charismatic voice and a very good, palatable message, seems to consistently, through his messages, say things like this that I find objectionable, or at least worthy of examination. Okay, and that's all I've got to say about that. So all these links are in the description, and I hope this has been helpful to you, and you kind of can know where I'm coming from. That I'm not talking out of my behind. I know a little something about it, and it grieves me that if someone's open to, like, okay, maybe we don't know everything and someone's done the work, I would hope they would at least look into it, having the spirit of truth and being inclined to truth, and pray to know the truth, to be in the truth, and never forget, brothers and sisters, this world is passing away. All of these things, it won't be long. Psalm 37 says, "Fret not yourself because of evil doers, they will soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb." And they have. Where's this guy now? Right? All his honors among men, all his ego achievements in life, 33rd degree grandmaster, loved by the people, credited with ending a horrible war and saving countless lives. Where is he now? He's dust. He's dust until he's resurrected and will face judgment. And I pray in the end he is saved. May it be that everyone, I wouldn't wish eternal death on anyone. Eternal life through Christ is the way. So there you go. All right, make a great day. Thanks for coming out.